In the suffocating silence of a Manhattan lawyer's office, Clara signed the divorce papers without a tear, a scream, or a plea. To her ex-husband, Wall Street's golden boy Bruno, she was nothing more than a pretty ornament, fading into obscurity with a settlement check. But the cold smile she gave him suggested otherwise. It took 5 years for Bruno to understand the true weight of that moment. Clara didn't just survive the separation. She was reborn, returning with $1 billion empire to purchase the very company that had cast her aside. This wasn't a breakup. It was a declaration of war. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Brown Vanderbilt Tower smelled of old money and lemon polish. It was a sterile, cold environment, fitting for the execution about to take place. Outside, the gray New York skyline loomed, weeping a steady drizzle against the floor-to-ceiling glass. Clara sat on one side of the mahogany table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress, one she had purchased off the rack at Macy's 3 years ago, before she became Mrs. Brown. Across from her sat Bruno Brown, the man who had once promised her the world, now scrolling through his BlackBerry, looking bored. Next to him sat the real power in the room, his mother, Beatrice Brown. Beatrice was a woman carved from granite and draped in Chanel. She didn't look at Clara. She looked through her, as if Clara were a smudge on a window pane that the cleaning crew had missed. "The terms are standard, Clara," the family lawyer, a weasel of a man named Mr. Henderson, droned on. He slid a heavy document across the table. It landed with a dull thud. "A lump sum of $200,000. You keep the jewelry Bruno gave you, excluding the family heirlooms, naturally, and of course the NDA." That was the shackle. It stipulated that Clara could never speak of the Brown family's business, their private dealings, or the incident in the Hamptons last summer. If she did, she would be sued into oblivion. "Just sign it, Clara." Bruno sighed, finally looking up. His blue eyes, once the anchor of her life, were now impatient. "I have a dinner at the Pierre at 7. Let's get this over with. You want out, you're out." Beatrice took a sip of her sparkling water. "Make sure she understands the clause about the name, Henderson. She is to revert to her maiden name immediately. We can't have her wandering around Manhattan pretending to still be one of us." Clara remained silent. For 3 years, she had been the perfect wife, the silent support, the one who smoothed over Bruno's drunken outbursts, who organized the charity galas, who concealed her own brilliance to make him feel like the smartest man in the room. She had a master's degree in algorithmic trading from MIT, a fact the Browns conveniently ignored because it didn't fit the narrative of the lucky girl from the Midwest who had married a prince. She reached for the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and expensive. "Is there anything you wish to say, Clara?" Henderson asked, his tone mocking. He expected begging. He expected a fight for more alimony. Clara uncapped the pen. The scratch of the nib on the paper was the only sound in the room. "Clara J. Evans." She pushed the papers back. Then she stood. "No," Clara said softly. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremble Beatrice had undoubtedly hoped for. "I think everything has been said." She looked at Bruno. He was already texting again. He didn't see the look in her eyes, a look not of defeat, but of calculation. She looked at Beatrice. "Goodbye, Beatrice." "Don't let the door hit you," Beatrice muttered, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. Henderson called the car. "I need to be at the Met Gala committee meeting." Clara walked to the elevator. She didn't look back. She didn't take the private elevator. She took the service lift. As the doors closed, sealing off the world of the 1%, she let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 years. She walked out of the building and into the rain. She had no umbrella. She had $200,000 to her name, pennies in this city, and a reputation that was about to be shredded by the Brown PR machine. She hailed a cab. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked. "JFK," Clara said. "International Terminal." She wasn't going home to Ohio. She wasn't staying in New York to be pitted. She was going to Zurich. She had a meeting with an old friend from MIT, a man named Lucas Weber, who had been urging her to examine a piece of code he'd written for the last 6 months. Bruno thought he had taken her life away. He didn't realize he had just handed back her freedom, and he had absolutely no idea that before she signed those papers, She had memorized the contents of the unencrypted hard drive he left on his desk every night. She knew where the bodies were buried, but she wasn't going to call the police. That was too easy. She was going to buy the graveyard. 2 years later. The world moves fast, but money moves faster. In the 2 years since Clara Evans vanished from New York society, the Brown Group had grown more aggressive. Bruno Brown, now CEO after his father's stroke, had steered the company toward high-risk tech acquisitions. He was the darling of CNBC, the maverick of Manhattan. But while Bruno was splashing cash on flashy apps and overvalued social media platforms, something was stirring in the shadows of the global market. A new player had emerged, a private equity firm called Estrella Holdings. Nobody knew who ran Estrella. The firm was registered in Singapore, with subsidiaries in Zurich and London. They were a ghost. They didn't give interviews. They didn't attend Davos. But they were lethal. They had quietly acquired a controlling stake in Lithium X, a failing battery manufacturer in Nevada. 6 months later, Lithium X patented a new solid-state battery that revolutionized the electric vehicle market. The stock soared 400%. Estrella made billions. Then they moved into biotech. They bought Celgen, a small lab in Boston teetering on bankruptcy. 3 months later, the FDA fast-tracked a breakthrough treatment for early-onset Alzheimer's. Another billion. In a glass-walled office overlooking the shimmering blue expanse of Lake Zurich, Clara Evans stood watching the snowfall. She looked different. The mousy brown hair was now a sharp platinum blonde bob. The off-the-rack Macy's dresses were gone, replaced by bespoke suits from Savile Row. Sleek, sharp, and formidable. She wore glasses now, thick black frames that softened the calculation in her eyes. "We have a problem, Clara," a voice said behind her. It was Lucas. He was dressed in a hoodie and jeans, looking every bit the hacker genius he was. He was the only person in the world who called her Clara. To the rest of her staff, she was simply Miss K. "What kind of problem?" Clara asked, turning around. She didn't panic. She hadn't panicked since the day she left New York. "It's Bruno," Lucas said, pulling up a schematic on the massive touchscreen table at the center of the room. "The Brown Group is trying to acquire Omnicore." Clara's eyes narrowed. Omnicore was a cloud computing infrastructure firm, boring, unsexy, and absolutely critical to the global banking system. It was the backbone of half of Wall Street's transaction processing. "He doesn't know what he's buying," Clara murmured, moving to the table. "Bruno thinks it's just a server farm. He wants the real estate assets." "Exactly." Lucas tapped the screen. "But if he buys Omnicore, he inadvertently gains access to the back-end data of his competitors. It's a monopoly waiting to happen. The SEC is asleep at the wheel. But if Brown gets this, he becomes too big to fail." "What's his bid?" $4.2 billion. Leveraged buyout. "He's overextending himself, Clara. He's using the Brown family trust as collateral." Clara froze. A slow smile spread across her face, the same smile she had worn in the lawyer's office. "He put the trust up?" she asked softly. "Yeah. Beatrice must be losing her grip if she allowed that. Or maybe he didn't tell her." "He didn't tell her," Clara said with certainty. "Bruno is arrogant. He thinks he can flip Omnicore, strip the assets, and repay the loan before his mother finds out." Clara tapped the table. "What's our liquidity?" Lucas grimaced. "We're tied up in the Singapore expansion. We have maybe 1.5 billion liquid. We can't outbid him." "We don't need to outbid him," Clara said, her mind racing through the algorithms she used to dream about at MIT. "We need to bleed him." She walked back to the window. The reflection showed a woman who had rebuilt herself from ash. "Lucas, get me a meeting with the board of Omnicore. Tell them Estrella is interested in a strategic partnership to fend off a hostile takeover. We're going to act as a white knight." "They won't meet with a ghost, Clara. You have to show your face." "If I show my face, the element of surprise is gone. Bruno will know I'm coming." "Then send a proxy," Lucas suggested. "Send Arthur. Arthur Pendleton, the disgraced Wall Street banker she had hired 6 months ago. He was a predator who had been banned from trading for 5 years due to aggressive tactics. His ban had just lifted. He despised the Browns almost as much as she did. "No," Clara said, turning back. "Arthur is too volatile. I need to handle this myself. She walked to her desk and picked up a tablet. She opened a secure file labeled Project Nemesis. We aren't going to buy Omnicore, Lucas. We're going to let Bruno buy it. Lucas looked baffled. What? We let him buy it? Clara interrupted, her voice hardening. But before he closes the deal, we're going to short the hell out of Brown Group stock. She swiped the screen, bringing up a dossier on a man named Sebastian Vane. And then we're going to leak the environmental report on Omnicore's server farms in Iceland. The one they buried in 2018. The one that proves their cooling systems have been leaching toxic coolant into the groundwater. Lucas's eyes went wide. That tanks the stock. Omnicore becomes toxic. And Bruno will be holding the bag, Clara finished. He'll have a $4 billion debt on an asset that is suddenly worthless. The Brown Trust will be insolvent. That's brutal, Clara. That's business, Lucas. She checked the time. Booked the jet. We're going to New York. To meet Omnicore? No. I have an invitation to the masquerade ball at the Guggenheim. It's time I checked in on my ex-husband. You're going to a party? I'm going to a funeral, Clara corrected. The Guggenheim Museum was transformed into a gilded cage for the night. The theme was Venetian decadence, a fitting title for a room full of people who possessed more wealth than some small nations. Clara stepped out of a sleek black limousine. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her like liquid shadow, the back plunging dangerously low. Her face was concealed behind a mask of intricate silver filigree, leaving only her eyes, cool, calculating, and unrecognizable, visible. She wasn't Clara Evans tonight. She was the investor. Inside, the air was thick with expensive perfume and the murmur of gossip. Clara moved through the crowd with a predatory grace she hadn't possessed 3 years earlier. She spotted them almost immediately. Bruno stood near the champagne fountain, laughing too loudly. On his arm was Sienna, a 23-year-old model who looked thoroughly bored. Beatrice was nearby, holding court with a senator, resembling a vulture draped in velvet. Clara felt a flicker of old fear, a phantom ache in her chest, but she crushed it. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. She felt a presence beside her. You look like you're plotting a murder, a deep voice drawled. Clara didn't flinch. She turned to see a man in a simple black domino mask. He was tall, with the kind of stillness that implied danger. Sebastian Vane, the rival billionaire Bruno had been attempting to destroy for years. Not a murder, Mr. Vane, Clara said, her voice smooth and lower than usual. Just a correction. Sebastian tilted his head. Do I know you? You will, Clara replied. I hear you're looking to offload your shipping logistics division. Va maritime. Sebastian stiffened. That's not public knowledge. It is to me. I'm willing to buy it tonight. Cash. Sebastian laughed, a harsh, surprised sound. Who are you? Call me Estrella, she said. I'll give you $1.2 billion for the division, but you have to do something for me first. And what is that? Go over to Bruno Brown. Tell him you heard a rumor that Omnicore is about to be acquired by a Chinese conglomerate. Tell him if he doesn't close the deal by tomorrow morning, he loses it forever. Sebastian's eyes narrowed behind the mask. He glanced at Bruno, then back at the mysterious woman in blue. He understood instantly that he was a pawn in a far larger game, but $1.2 billion for a struggling division was a lifeline he desperately needed. You play dirty, Sebastian noted, with a reluctant grin. I learned from the best, Clara whispered, her gaze drifting to Beatrice. She watched as Sebastian crossed the room toward Bruno. She saw the color drain from Bruno's face, panic and greed, the two most reliable motivators of his shallow soul. Bruno immediately pulled out his phone and stepped away from Sienna. Clara moved to intercept him. She brushed past him, her silk dress whispering against his tuxedo. Careful, Bruno, she murmured as she passed, close enough for him to catch her perfume, a custom blend of bergamot and wood smoke. Nothing like the vanilla she used to wear. Bruno spun around, seizing her wrist. Who are you? How do you know my name? Clara looked down at his hand until he released her. Someone who knows that Omnicore is a house of cards, she said smoothly, planting the reverse psychology. Don't buy it, Bruno. It's a trap. Bruno sneered, his arrogance surging. A trap? Or are you trying to scare me off, so your client can swoop in? Vane just told me the Chinese are circling. Believe what you want, Clara said, walking away. But don't say you weren't warned. She vanished into the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew Bruno. If you told him not to do something, he would do it twice, just to prove he was the smartest man in the room. By warning him, she had sealed his fate. She slipped out of the gala before midnight, like a Cinderella who had planted a bomb instead of losing a glass slipper. The next morning, the headache behind Bruno's eyes was blinding, but the adrenaline was stronger. He paced his corner office, barking orders into his headset. I don't care what the due diligence says, Henderson. Waive it. If we don't sign by noon, we lose the asset to overseas buyers. Get the papers ready. I'm authorizing the transfer from the family trust. Across the city, in a rented penthouse suite serving as Estrella's temporary headquarters, Clara sat before a bank of monitors. Lucas was typing furiously. He's moving the money, Lucas said, his voice tight. 4.2 billion. It's leaving the Brown Trust accounts. It's hitting the escrow. Wait for it, Clara said, sipping her black coffee. He's signing, Lucas said. The digital signature just authenticated on the Omnicore server. Now, Clara said. Lucas hit enter. It wasn't a bomb. It was a press release. Breaking. Whistleblower leaks toxic report on Omnicore data centers. Within seconds, the news tickers on Clara's monitors lit up red. The report, detailed and damning, revealed that Omnicore's primary data centers in Iceland had been leaking coolant into a protected glacial reserve for 5 years. The fines alone would be in the billions. The cleanup costs would be astronomical. But the real killer was the regulatory freeze. The EU immediately suspended Omnicore's license to operate. Stock is halting, Lucas whispered. Omnicore is down 60% in pre-market trading. Clara watched the numbers cascade downward. It was a bloodbath. Bruno just bought a burning building, Clara said softly. And he used his mother's checkbook to do it. Back at Brown Tower, the scene was chaotic. Phones rang incessantly. Analysts were shouting. Bruno stood frozen, staring at the CNBC screen, where the headline Brown Group acquires toxic asset flashed in bold letters. The door to his office flew open. Beatrice Brown didn't walk in. She stormed in. What have you done? She hissed, her voice low and terrifying. It was a sure thing, Bruno stammered, pale as a sheet. Vane told me the Chinese. You listen to Sebastian, Vane? Beatrice hurled a tablet onto his desk. The EPA just announced a probe. The stock is worthless, Bruno. You've leveraged the trust. We are exposed. I can fix it, Bruno said, his hands trembling. I can sell off the subsidiaries. I can. You can do nothing, Beatrice snapped. Get out of my chair. Mother, please. Get out. As Bruno sank onto the leather sofa, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I told you it was a trap. Bruno stared at the screen. The woman from the masquerade, he whispered. Estrella. Who is she? At the penthouse, Clara stood and stretched. Phase 1 is complete, she said. He's wounded. She turned to the whiteboard where she had mapped out the Brown Empire. She picked up a red marker and circled a single subsidiary, Brown Media, the crown jewel, the propaganda machine that had kept the family's image immaculate for decades. Now we go for the kill. What's Phase 2? Lucas asked, watching her with a mixture of awe and unease. We take his voice, Clara said, and we need help. Get me a meeting with the one person Beatrice Brown fears more than bankruptcy. Who? Julianne Moore, Clara said. The woman who knows where the real money is hidden. Lucas paused. She lives in exile in Paris. She hasn't spoken to anyone in 20 years. She'll speak to me, Clara said, reaching for her coat, because I'm going to offer her the one thing the Browns took from her. Money. No. Clara smiled. Revenge. Paris in November was a city of gray stone and weeping skies. Clara sat in the corner of a small, dimly lit bistro in Le Marais, nursing a glass of Bordeaux. She wasn't looking at the menu. She was watching the door. At exactly 2 p.m., the bell above the entrance chimed. A woman walked in, older, perhaps in her 60s, but carrying herself with a rigid, unbreakable elegance. She wore a trench coat belted tightly at the waist and oversized sunglasses, even indoors. This was Julianne Moore, not the actress, but the woman who had once been the hidden architect behind the brown throne, before Beatrice had surgically removed her from the picture 2 decades ago. Julianne scanned the room, spotted Clara, and approached. She didn't sit immediately. She studied Clara with sharp, assessing eyes. "You're younger than I expected," Julianne said, her voice roughened by years of cigarettes. "And prettier. Beatrice despises pretty women." "Sit down, Julianne," Clara said, gesturing to the chair. "I ordered your usual. Espresso black. No sugar." Julianne sat, removing her sunglasses to reveal tired but fierce green eyes. "You did your homework. Estrella, the ghost of Wall Street." "Clara," she corrected. "My name is Clara Evans. I was Bruno's wife." Julianne let out a dry, humorless laugh. "The one they chewed up and discarded 3 years ago. I read about the divorce. A quiet affair. Very on-brand." "I was quiet then," Clara said, leaning forward. "I'm not quiet anymore." She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a live feed of the Brown Group's stock ticker, bleeding red, down 45% since the Omnicore disaster. "I did that," Clara said softly. Julianne studied the screen, a flicker of hunger surfacing in her eyes. "You crippled the boy. Bruno was always an idiot. But Beatrice, she's the Hydra. You cut off one head. 2 more grow back. She'll liquidate the assets, conceal the cash in the Caymans, and resurface under a new name. You haven't won yet." "I know," Clara replied. "That's why I'm here. I know about the Shadow Ledger." The air in the bistro seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julianne went still. "That's a myth," Julianne whispered. "A ghost story." "It's real," Clara pressed. "Beatrice didn't build the empire on shrewd investments. She built it on money laundering for the cartels in the 90s. You were the accountant, Julianne. You established the shell companies. You have the codes." Julianne looked away, gazing out at the rain-slicked cobblestones. "If I give you those codes, Beatrice goes to prison. But so do I." "No," Clara said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "This is full immunity. My attorneys negotiated a deal with the SEC. You turned state's evidence. You walk free." She slid a second envelope across. "And this is a deed to a villa in Tuscany, held in a trust no one can touch. You get your life back, Julianne. You get to watch her burn from a terrace in Italy." Julianne's hand trembled as she touched the envelope. For 20 years, she had lived in fear, silenced by Beatrice's threats. "Why?" Julianne asked. "Why go this far? You have money. You have power. Why not simply walk away?" Clara's expression solidified into something cold and resolute. "Because they took my dignity. They made me feel worthless." Then Clara's voice fractured, just for a moment. "Then I discovered Bruno had been sterilizing me, without my knowledge. He was dissolving medication into my morning smoothies, because Beatrice didn't want what she called peasant blood diluting the bloodline." Julianne gasped. The cruelty was shocking even to her. "I can never have children, Julianne," Clara whispered. "So I'm going to give birth to something else instead. I'm going to bring about their destruction." Julianne picked up the pen from the table. She wrote a series of numbers and a password on a napkin. 1-9-0-8-8-8, Project Janus. "The ledger is on a server in the basement of the Brown family estate in the Hamptons," Julianne said. "It's not digital. It's hardwired. It has never been connected to the internet. That's why no one has ever found it." "The Hamptons," Clara mused. "That's convenient." "Why?" Clara smiled, dark and deliberate. "Because Bruno is hosting a crisis management gala there this weekend. He thinks he can charm the investors back into the fold." "He's inviting the wolves to dinner," Julianne observed. "No," Clara said, standing and pocketing the napkin. "He's inviting the executioner." The Brown family silver lining gala was a desperate attempt to place a bandage over a gunshot wound. The air at the Hamptons estate, usually saturated with sea salt and polished privilege, now carried the scent of perspiration and expensive gin. The mood was funereal, though the decor was festive. White orchids lined the grand foyer, their petals already beginning to brown at the edges, a quiet metaphor for the family's deteriorating fortune. Bruno Brown stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the crashing Atlantic. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His tuxedo, once a custom-fitted armor that made him feel indestructible, now seemed a size too large. His hands trembled as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Bruno, stop fidgeting," Beatrice hissed, materializing at his side. She was draped in diamonds, her spine as rigid as a steel beam, but even her heavy makeup couldn't conceal the shadows beneath her eyes. "The investors are watching. If they sense fear, they'll dismantle us before the appetizers are served." "They're already dismantling us, Mother," Bruno whispered. "The stock is in freefall. The creditors are calling. Even Sebastian Vane won't return my calls." "Because Sebastian Vane is a coward," Beatrice snapped. "We have weathered market crashes before. We will endure this. We simply need to reassure them that the Omnicore scandal is a temporary setback, not a fatal wound. Now go, smile, charm, do what Browns do best." As Bruno entered the ballroom to play his part, the heavy iron gates at the far end of the long driveway swung open. It wasn't the arrival of another socialite or a sympathetic banker. A convoy of 4 matte black SUVs rolled silently up the gravel path, their headlights slicing through the coastal fog like the eyes of predators. They didn't pull into the designated valet area. They stopped directly at the front steps, blocking the entrance. The string quartet inside faltered and went silent. Guests began drifting toward the windows. The door to the lead vehicle opened. Clara Evans stepped out, and the world seemed to tilt. She was no longer the soft-spoken woman who had lived in the shadow of this house. She wore a bespoke white power suit that glowed beneath the estate's floodlights. Her hair was pulled into a sharp, severe ponytail, and her eyes, once clouded with the confusion of a gaslit wife, were now as clear and cold as glacial ice. Behind her stepped Lucas, and a team of people in dark suits carrying encrypted laptops and legal briefcases. Clara didn't wait to be admitted. She walked up the marble steps, her heels striking the stone like the ticking of a countdown. Bruno met her at the door, his face cycling through confusion before landing on indignation. "Clara, what is this? This is a private event. You have no business being here. Security." He looked toward the 2 guards stationed at the door. They didn't move. They stood at attention, eyes fixed ahead. "They aren't going to assist you, Bruno," Clara said, her voice carrying a calm authority that hushed the room. "I acquired the firm that provides your estate security 4 hours ago. Technically, they report to me now. And as for my business here, I think you'll find I'm the only person in this room who has any real business here." Beatrice pushed through the crowd, her face distorted with rage. "You little parasite. You think a new hairstyle and a rented car make you our equal? I gave you $200,000 to disappear. Get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." Clara smiled, and for the first time, Beatrice looked genuinely afraid. It wasn't anger in Clara's expression. It was ownership. "That's the thing, Beatrice," Clara said, stepping into the foyer and moving past them as though they were furniture. "It isn't your property. Not anymore." She turned to face the crowd of investors, many of them the most influential figures on Wall Street. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clara announced, "my name is Clara Evans, CEO of Estrella Holdings. Many of you have been asking who has been shorting Brown Group stock for the past month. You've been asking who leaked the Omnicore environmental reports. You've been asking who purchased the distressed debt of the Brown Family Trust when the banks began calling in their markers this morning." A collective gasp moved through the room. The ghost of Wall Street wasn't a foreign conglomerate. It was the woman they had all dismissed at cocktail parties for years. "I have spent the last 3 years constructing a billion-dollar empire while you were occupied laughing at my divorce settlement," Clara continued, her gaze sweeping the room. "As of 6 o'clock this evening, Estrella Holdings has acquired a 51% controlling interest in the Brown Group. I have also purchased the underlying mortgages on this estate and on Brown Tower in Manhattan." Bruno's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "You're lying," Bruno stammered. "The trust is protected. My father—" "Your father's signature is on the papers you signed to leverage the trust for the Omnicore deal, Bruno," Clara interrupted. You were so eager to prove yourself a visionary that you didn't read the fine print. You granted the banks the right to sell that debt in the event of a 30% drop in stock value. I was the only buyer. She walked to the grand piano, where Lucas was already connecting a laptop to the estate's media system. Now, Clara said, her voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous register, let's discuss why the Brown Group is actually worth nothing. Don't you dare, Beatrice hissed, stepping forward. I will bury you, Clara. I will destroy everything you've built. You already tried to bury me, Beatrice, Clara replied. You forgot that I was a seed. She nodded to Lucas. The massive screens in the ballroom, which had been cycling through a slideshow of Brown family heritage photos, flickered. A document appeared. It was a ledger, handwritten, meticulous, and exhaustive. This is the shadow ledger, Clara said. It is a record of 30 years of money laundering. It documents how the Brown Group moved illicit currency through offshore accounts to fund their early acquisitions. It includes dates, amounts, and most importantly, the signatures of those who authorized each transaction. The screen scrolled. There, in bold, unmistakable ink, was Beatrice Brown's signature, beside a transaction for $20 million from a known South American cartel front company. The room fell utterly silent. This was no longer merely a financial coup. It was a criminal reckoning. And for you, Bruno, Clara said, turning to her ex-husband, who appeared on the verge of collapse. The image on screen changed. This is a medical laboratory report from a private clinic in Switzerland, Clara said, her voice steady, but carrying the only trace of real emotion she had shown all night. This is a record of the pharmaceutical supplements delivered to our home every month for 3 years. The ones you insisted I take each morning. It wasn't folic acid, Bruno. It was a long-term hormonal suppressant, formulated to ensure I would never conceive. You and your mother decided I was not genetically worthy to carry a brown heir, so you had me sterilized without my knowledge or consent. Even the most jaded figures in the room recoiled. A wave of revulsion moved through the crowd. Bruno looked around wildly, searching for a single face that didn't regard him with disgust. He found none. I didn't know it would be permanent, Bruno whispered, his voice breaking. Mother said it was for the best. She said we needed to focus on the business first. The business is gone, Bruno, Clara said, and so is your mother's protection. Outside, the distant wail of sirens began cutting through the sound of the waves. Red and blue lights swept across the white orchids in the foyer. I have spent the last 48 hours with the SEC and the FBI, Clara said. I have provided them with everything, the ledger, the medical records, the tax fraud. They're here for the books, Beatrice. And they're here for you. Beatrice Brown, the woman who had commanded New York society with an iron fist and a string of pearls, suddenly seemed to deflate into the nearest chair. All the authority left her body. She stared at Clara, not with fury, but with a hollow, devastating recognition. She had been outmaneuvered by the one person she had never thought worth watching. The front doors burst open. Federal agents and windbreakers flooded the foyer. Beatrice Brown, Bruno Brown, you are under arrest for racketeering, securities fraud, and conspiracy. As the agents moved in, the guests scattered for the exits, desperate to put distance between themselves and the wreckage of the Brown name. In the middle of the chaos, Clara stood completely still. Bruno was being led past her. His head was bowed. He stopped for a moment, looking at her with a mixture of terror and desperate, hollow hope. Clara, he whispered, please talk to them. Tell them I didn't know. You loved me once. Clara reached out and straightened his crooked tuxedo tie, a gesture she had performed 1,000 times before. But this time, she didn't smooth it down with a kiss. She tightened it slightly, just enough to make him catch his breath. I loved a man who didn't exist, Bruno, she said quietly. The man standing here now is just a ghost, and ghosts don't get to ask for favors. She turned away as the agents pulled him toward the door. Lucas walked up beside her, holding a tablet. The market opens in 12 hours. Every major news outlet is running the story. The Brown Group is finished. Estrella is the name on everyone's lips. Clara looked around the empty, ruined ballroom. The orchids were crushed underfoot. The champagne was pooled across the floor. The empire had collapsed. Good, Clara said, drawing a slow breath of cold, salt-edged air. Now we begin the real work. She walked out of the house, down the steps, and into her SUV. She didn't look back at the flashing lights or the crumbling estate. She looked forward, into the dark, toward the city she was about to build in her own image. The divorce was finally over. The empire had just begun. 6 months after the fall, the morning sun over Manhattan didn't simply rise. It struck the glass of the new Estrella Tower like a spotlight, heralding a new era. High above the noise of taxi horns and the frenetic rhythm of Wall Street, Clara Evans stood in her office on the 60th floor. The space was a deliberate counterpoint to the Brown era, where Bruno had favored heavy mahogany, dark velvet, and the airless atmosphere of a gentleman's club. Clara's environment was a sanctuary of light. The walls were soft matte white, dressed with modern art that celebrated movement and complexity. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city she had effectively claimed. On her desk sat a single-framed photograph, not of a family, but of the MIT campus where her journey had truly begun. A soft chime signaled Lucas's arrival. He walked in carrying 2 cups of black coffee and a thick folder. He looked exhausted but alive with purpose. The final liquidation of the Brown assets was completed at midnight, he said, handing her a cup. The Brown Group is officially a footnote in history. The Department of Justice has concluded its asset seizure, and all remaining subsidiaries have been fully absorbed into Estrella. Clara took a sip. Its bitterness grounded her. And the diamond? Back at the auction house, Lucas replied. The Brown diamond. Lot 405. Bidding opens at 2 p.m. Make sure our proxy is ready, Clara said. I want that stone, Lucas. Not to wear it, to repurpose it. The auction room was a theater of the privileged. The air hummed with quiet competition and the rustle of glossy catalogs. When Lot 405 was announced, the room stilled. The 40-carat yellow diamond rested in a velvet-lined case, radiating light under the gallery lamps like a captive star. The Brown diamond, the auctioneer announced. A stone with a century of provenance. Opening bid at $4 million. The bidding was swift and combative. $6 million from a Russian industrialist. $7 million from a technology executive. From the back of the room, a woman in a simple white trench coat rose to her feet. She didn't raise a paddle. She simply spoke. $10 million, Clara said. The room froze. The auctioneer, a man who had witnessed every variety of excess, actually stumbled over his words. $10 million. Going once. Twice. The hammer fell. Sold. Clara didn't linger for congratulations or murmured admiration. She walked to the front, signed the paperwork with the same steady hand that had once signed her divorce papers, and watched as the diamond was secured in its carrier. Lucas, she said quietly as they stepped out into the cool afternoon air. Take this to the workshop. I want it divided into 100 smaller stones. Set them into simple silver pendants. We'll present them to the graduates of the Phoenix Foundation's vocational program next month. Lucas stared at her. You're converting a 40-carat diamond into 100 necklaces for survivors of domestic abuse. I'm turning a symbol of vanity into a symbol of resilience, Clara replied. The Browns used that diamond to display their worth. Now it will remind those women of theirs. The second stop of the day was far less elegant. The federal penitentiary upstate was a gray, brutalist structure that appeared to absorb the light from the sky around it. Clara disliked the heavy groan of the iron gates. She disliked the sterile scent of the visitor center. But she had a debt of closure to settle. She sat behind the plexiglass and waited. When Bruno was let in, she barely recognized him. The golden boy was gone. His hair had gone dull and gray, and the arrogant posture that had once defined him had collapsed entirely. He lowered himself into the chair in his orange jumpsuit, looking garish against his pallor. You came, Bruno whispered into the receiver. I'm closing the books, Clara said. This is the last time we will speak. Bruno's eyes moved restlessly, searching for an exit from the moment. Mother is in the infirmary. She had another stroke. They say she won't walk again. She keeps calling for you, Clara. She thinks it's 20 years ago. She thinks you're the housekeeper. Beatrice always struggled with the present, Clara said evenly. Why are you doing this? Bruno suddenly surged forward, his voice cracking with a brittle, desperate anger. You have the money. You have the power. You've humiliated us across every news channel in the world. Isn't it enough? Why come here to gloat? I didn't come to gloat, Bruno, Clara said. I came to tell you that I forgive you. Bruno blinked, stunned. You forgive me? Not because you deserve it, Clara said, leaning closer to the glass, but because I'm done carrying the weight of what you did. The anger, the betrayal, the grief. It was the last thread still binding me to you. By forgiving you, I'm finally cutting it. You are no longer my husband. You aren't even my adversary. You're simply a man in a cage. Bruno struck the glass with the flat of his palm. I loved you in my own way. I loved you. You loved a version of me that was small enough to keep in your pocket, Clara replied. The moment I began to grow, you tried to diminish me. You and your mother were so consumed by your fear of losing control that you destroyed your own legacy. You didn't just try to suppress me, Bruno. You suppressed the Brown bloodline. She stood, returning the receiver to its hook. Bruno was saying something behind the glass, his face contorted, but the sound was muted and remote. He was a ghost haunting a house that no longer stood. As she emerged into the late afternoon, the sun was descending, painting the horizon in shades of bruised violet and amber. Back at Estrella Tower, a gathering was underway, but it bore no resemblance to the galas of the Brown era. Clara walked into the ballroom to find it populated with the staff of the Phoenix Foundation, community organizers, and the women she had spent 6 months supporting. There were no gowns, no affected elegance, only the sound of genuine laughter and glasses raised in honest celebration. Sebastian Vane stood near the balcony. He had lost his shipping division to Clara in the acquisition, but rather than harboring resentment, he had asked for a role. He was now her COO, and arguably her most devoted ally. The numbers for the first quarter are in, Sebastian said, handing her a glass of sparkling water. We've outperformed the Brown Group's best year by 20%, and we did it without a single bribe or offshore account. People perform better when they aren't afraid of their own shadows, Sebastian. He looked at her, truly seeing the person behind the enterprise. You know, the press is calling you the Ice Queen. They say you're colder than Beatrice ever was. Clara looked out at the room, at a young woman who had just completed her first week of law school on an Estrella scholarship, and at an elderly woman who had finally found a safe home after years spent in fear. If being an Ice Queen means I'm the one who provides the foundation for others to build their lives upon, Clara said, then I'll carry the title. She walked to the center of the room and raised her glass. The conversation stilled. 3 years ago, Clara began, her voice resonant and unflinching. I was told that my value was determined by the name on my marriage certificate. I was told that my silence was my greatest virtue. I was told that without the Brown family, I was nothing. She paused, letting her eyes move across the faces gathered before her. But I learned that the most enduring things in this world are built on the quietest foundations. We are the ones they never anticipated. We are the ones who signed the documents, absorbed the blows, and kept moving. Tonight, we don't celebrate a company. We celebrate the fact that no one, no husband, no employer, no mother-in-law, holds the authority to define who we are. The applause that followed was louder than anything the Browns had ever inspired. Late that night, after the guests had departed, Clara sat alone on the penthouse balcony. The city spread below her in an endless field of light. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was the first necklace of resilience, a small, brilliant fragment of the Brown diamond, cut to a sharp and beautiful point. She put it on. The cold metal against her skin felt like a promise kept. She had lost a marriage, a name, and the possibility of a family. But in the space that loss had carved out, she had constructed a world in which she was, finally, completely free. Clara Evans closed her eyes and listened to the city breathe. For the first time in her life, the silence wasn't a cage. It was a victory,